All right, everybody, video 5 of the SDIRA series. And for this one, we're going to be changing gears a little bit because I guarantee there's still some of you out there where you're going, all right, this whole self-directing thing, it's all fine and dandy, Josh, but I'm broke. I don't have enough money to invest in retirement funds, let alone just my daily life. And I'm here to tell you, yes, you do. 100% you do. And I can guarantee you because I had the same mindset. So if you're in that situation where you think you don't have enough money to do this, this video is most definitely for you. And for those of you where you are good with your personal finances, still a good video for you because you're going to pick up some good tips on the way. So really, real quick, give you a quick background. So I grew up in a large family. I had 7 siblings, my 2 parents. And needless to say, growing up, we weren't the most wealthy. I mean, wealthy in love. Obviously, I had a very loving family, loving parents. Really, I get along really well with all my siblings, surprisingly, with how many there are. It was great from that aspect, but from a financial standpoint or a financial literacy standpoint, it was not so good. And really, my parents, I mean, they were living paycheck to paycheck, and that's not their fault. I mean, that's no fault to them. I'm not saying anything bad about my parents. Like I said, I absolutely love my parents, but it's just from their upbringing, they weren't taught any financial skills. And that's really pretty common across the board for a lot of people where it's not talked about in the home, and people don't really have, when they're introduced to the world out of high school, they don't really necessarily have the skills to actually live life. So it's kind of crazy. But anyways, that's a brief background. And you may be asking, so what exactly did I do to get out of that mindset? Well, really, initially I thought that, hey, obviously, if I'm not having enough money, I should probably find a job where I can make more money. So I was constantly going, okay, as soon as I got a job, okay, what's the next level? What's the next level? Okay, if that's where I'm tapped out, then let's go to a different job and let's move up there. Well, guess what? Finally, I ended up at my corporate career, and that's where I met my wife. And at that point in time, I was making pretty decent money and still living paycheck to paycheck. Again, that's why it's a mindset thing. It's 100%. You have the money, you're not focusing in the right place. So it finally, long story short, got to the point where I was fed up with the situation. My wife and I were fed up with the situation. We started reading personal finance books, looking at podcasts, so on and so forth. One of the really good ones, which I would highly recommend, is The Simple Path to Wealth by J.L. Collins. Really, it's part of the financial independence, retire early community. If you're aware of that, that's a whole nother rabbit hole. We'll get into that a little bit, but it's not necessarily fully about retiring early. It's got some really good just financial tips in there. So I would highly recommend it. That's some good stuff. But I think a lot of people probably fall within the same. I mean, I'm not unique in this by any means. There's a lot of people in this situation where they're living paycheck to paycheck, but again, it's because they're not focusing on the right place. So a lot of us would probably feel we fall into this category to where our finances are like a strainer or a colander. So like when you're pouring out spaghetti to drain out all the water, that is our finances. And instead, the water in this case, that's not water. That's all our money. Our W-2 or our income is coming in, and then all of that money is just seeping out with expenses, and we have no idea where it's all going. And I guarantee a lot of you do not know exactly where all your finances are going. So that brings me to my next point. Well, first off, when it comes to retirement accounts, I do want to bring up the fact that, hey, we do all start with zero. When you're starting, it doesn't matter which part of your life you're in. If you're starting a Roth, you're going to be starting from zero regardless of where you're at. So keep that in mind. But I want to give you some idea on how my wife and I, how we got out of the situation. So like I said, we were going and we were researching personal finance stuff, like personal finance books, podcasts. Again, that Simple Path to Wealth. There's like the Choose FI podcast. You've got the Dave Ramsey stuff. You've got Rich Dad, Poor Dad, stuff like that. We were reading them all because we're trying to figure out, okay, how do we get out of this situation? But one of the main things that really helped us initially was we had to take initial inventory of where our finances were even at. So your financial picture, everybody, I mean, it's all similar. You have your income, then you have your expenses, and then your savings, whatever you have left over. Hopefully you're not in the negative from your income, but if you're not, then you're going to have some savings. And this is also kind of the discretionary income as well. So what we did when we were first trying to go down this journey was we took a hard look at our expenses. Now, keep in mind your income, this can be your W-2. Maybe you have a side job, maybe not. Again, I didn't until a little later down in this path, but what we were doing initially is we looked at our expenses. And this was a little painful. And it's honestly, you have to go through some temporary pain to get the long-term gain. So what we did is we looked at 12 months of statements. I'm going to abbreviate that. So it was 12 months of statements. So that was our bank statements, our credit card statements. And really what we were doing, again, we were taking inventory of where were our expenses at? Where was all our money going? What were the non-negotiables? So this is important. You need to identify out of those 12 months. And real quick, why am I choosing 12 months? Because you need to see, okay, what's reoccurring? What are reoccurring expenses that keep coming up? And if it's something you don't need, kick it out. So one thing you want to make sure, non-negotiables, I'm going to abbreviate that. So non-negotiables, really that's things like obviously your rent, your utilities, fuel that you have to put in your car. Well, that's something you could potentially reduce a little bit. But I mean, things just for your day-to-day living. Now, what I'm not talking about when I'm referring to non-negotiables is that vanilla latte that you want to get every day. Yeah, that's probably not a non-negotiable. I mean, obviously, maybe down the line, that's okay. But if you're in a financial state of hurt, you really shouldn't be spending money on vanilla lattes at Starbucks every day. I mean, that stuff's expensive and it adds up quick. So again, we need to take this inventory, get ourselves in a good position, and then increase our income, and then go from there. Then you can start incorporating some of that stuff back. So again, we found out what our non-negotiables were, then everything else we kicked out. I mean, we had subscriptions that for like TV services that I had no idea. Well, my wife, she actually had the same subscription that I did. It's like, why are we double paying this? We can axe one. And in some cases, it's like, we aren't really watching TV anymore. Let's just axe it completely. And then there was even things like you could reduce expenses for the ones that you do need. Like say, for instance, your cell phone bill. We were paying 2 lines on Verizon. It was well over 100. It was like 120, 130 a month. And really, I mean, we're just using it as a phone. It's nothing special. I mean, phone and camera every once in a while. So we looked at other vendors like Mint Mobile. You could get a $15 per month per line plan, and it's really not that bad. Especially, I mean, if you're on a pinch. The funny thing is, I'm still on that plan because there's no reason for me to go to Verizon. I haven't needed. I mean, the service Mint Mobile goes off of AT&T, and where I live, the coverage is plenty sufficient, and I really don't run over my data because I'm hooked up to Wi-Fi a lot of the time. So again, that's little things like that add up a huge amount. So you want to take inventory, see what your non-negotiables are, see what subscriptions or reoccurring items you can kick out, or stuff that, hey, we really shouldn't be spending money in this area. And then from there, look at, okay, which areas that we really do have to spend that money, how can we reduce it? Another one is your annual homeowner's insurance. If you own a home, that annual insurance, that first year is usually typically pretty good, but if you're not paying attention, every single year they hike it up a little bit. So it's a really good practice once a year, take a look at that insurance and get some quotes from other vendors and see, okay, would it be smart to switch that over? So things to keep in mind there. But again, major thing, make sure your expenses are not more than your income coming in, and then figure out you need to take that inventory, and then you'll have some savings left over. And I guarantee if you do this, again, it's probably going to take maybe a Saturday or an afternoon on the weekend. It's not a really enjoyable experience going through all these statements, but it's going to be beneficial for you because you're going to identify, okay, this is why we're losing so much money. It's a good practice to go through. So once you've got your expenses worked out, again, you can start saving a little bit. Make sure you're putting a portion into savings and kind of set it and forget it. There's high yield savings accounts like CIT is one that we found. Now, at the time of this recording, it's like 4.8%. Last year, it was in the 5% range. But that's a lot better than your average savings account at just your regular bank where you're earning like 0.1%. And again, I said CIT Savings Bank. It's not Citibank. Don't get confused. It's CIT Savings Bank. And so we got the Platinum Savings account on there. And yeah, it's better for if you need money in a liquid, you need liquidity with it. You don't want to invest it in something. It's your savings, your kind of emergency fund, if you will. That's a good high yield savings account. There's others out there. Do your research, but I'm just telling you that's what we ended up doing. So once we got all our expenses worked out, then we went for the emergency fund. Like I said, for as far as savings, we saved up 3 months. So again, there's multiple ideas or multiple camps where they decide, okay, what's sufficient for an emergency fund. We decided on 3 months. That was plenty sufficient for us. So again, we figured out, okay, what's our actual expenses every single month? And then we've saved up 3 months of expenses. Now, what this does is it gave us a ton of breathing room. We were finally no longer living paycheck to paycheck. And with that emergency fund, it gives you a peace of mind, say, if your car breaks down or some big expense comes up mid-month and you don't necessarily have all the money in your account, but you do have this emergency fund built up, it's not going to financially break you or financially decimate you. So that's good. It's good to have that. So from there, then we actually got introduced, and this is kind of why I brought up that whole Simple Path to Wealth book. So that was introduced to me by a colleague that I worked with in the corporate career. And again, it's all about retire early. So it's called FIRE. So Financial Independence, Retire Early. And they're all about savings rate. So I'll get into the next topic with that, just to give you an idea of what our path looked like. Again, as I've gone through this, I mean, a lot of this stuff is just good financial practice. But if you're already good with your finances, just take the shortcut. Don't go the hard way that I did. I mean, go and just start self-directing. Invest in what you know, because you're going to skyrocket your accounts way quicker than the way I did it initially. Again, I'm in a good place now, but don't go through the 5 years of pain that I did. If you are good with your finances, go straight to self-directing. It is awesome. So when we're talking about savings rate, so that FIRE, that what I was telling you about, so it's FIRE. Again, financial independence, retire early. And they're all about savings rate. So their whole concept is if you identify what your annual expenses are, and then you multiply that by 25 to 30. So say your annual expenses are 60K. You multiply that by 25 to 30. Then that's what, like might have to check the numbers on this, but 1.5 million. They're saying that's essentially what your retirement, that's what you need saved up in your retirement accounts to be like, okay, I can pull the plug and then I'll be sufficient for the rest of my life. So their whole financial early concept is you save up to this point, and then they have you invest in a very particular, or they advise you to invest in this particular mutual fund. So it's called VTSAX. I'll put that down right here. VTSAX. And really what this is it's just a fund that tracks the S&P 500. So that's like the top 500 companies in the US. Really, if you're investing in this, you're investing in the US economy. So why they say that, get into why they say that, because from the S&P 500 standpoint, so in the last 50 years, it's returned on average about 8%. It's like 7.8%. So 7.8%, practically 8%. So over a 50-year time horizon, it returned 8% on average. Now, granted, if you go down to 30, 20, 10, you'll see different like fluctuations in number. Actually, the last 10 years were pretty good. I think it was closer to 13%. Again, that's kind of unique, but they're over the concept that on average, this is a passive way to invest. You don't pick individual stocks. You just go in this broad-based mutual fund. You're a little more spread out or diversified in that sense. And on average, you're going to make pretty decent returns. Now, off of this model, they indicate that if you can save up to 25 your annual expenses, then you can feasibly retire and only take, like, it was on average like a 4% withdrawal rate every year. So if you only take 4% on average every single year, then that number that you hit for your expenses that you projected for your retirement, that what you needed in retirement, that will survive you for the rest of your life as far as retirement goes. So it was a whole interesting concept. But going back to savings rate, they're heavy in the savings rate game because they're here to get you to retirement faster. So they have people where they're in their 30s and they've got like an 8-10 year time horizon where they legitimately can retire early because they've increased their savings rate to a certain extent. And as you increase your savings rate that is going into this fund or a fund similar to it, it just cuts down that time to get to this number that much faster. Now, really, the first 100,000 in your retirement account, it's a bit difficult. It's a challenge to get there initially, but after the first 100, it starts compounding pretty quickly. So the reason why I'm bringing this up is we were going down this path, but what we realized part of the way through was we found other investments like real estate. I started getting into real estate quite a bit. That was my side hustle then. I was like, well, I don't necessarily want to retire. I don't really feel like I'm going to have a need to retire. So this is kind of not my thing necessarily anymore. I mean, if you enjoy what you're doing, that's great. But I don't want to be under the constraints of, oh, these are my expenses, I need to stick to that. Again, I want to have a little more impact to where I can provide more of a positive impact to other people's lives. And to do that, for me, I don't feel like this is going to be sufficient. So I want to make more of an impact than that. But again, for people that are in that camp, it's awesome. It's a really cool strategy. I'll put some links in the description. There's some good articles like, it's funny, it's actually the guy who wrote the foreword on this book. His name's Mr. Money Mustache. At least that's his stage name. But it's funny. I mean, it's a little outlandish, but he's got some really good info on this topic. So good stuff there. And yeah, so that's as far as the savings rate. Now, when we started this investment journey with the whole financial independence, retire early thing, we saw the VTSAX, stuff like that. Well, what we were looking at, the important thing to look at there is when you are investing in stocks, bonds, and mutual funds, if you're not going down the self-directing path yet, you're just still in the standard brokerage, everyone's going to tell you you need to assess your risk tolerance. So let's see this. You got low. Let's say this is your risk. This is high. Got low here again. We'll just put H for high there. And this is return. So on this axis, so for the risk profile, really the least risky items in your standard retirement accounts, more often than not, people are going to say those are bonds. Bonds are the least risky. They're also the least, they typically provide the least amount of returns. So it's lower risk, but you get that security, but you also have not as great returns. So in the middle, a little bit more risky, better returns are usually, they're called mutual funds. Mutual funds, there's also ETFs. So those are exchange traded funds. Really the difference between these, if you're not familiar with them, a mutual fund, it's a combination of like multiple companies in one, and it closes out at the end of the day. If you want to pull out of that mutual fund, it's a little less liquid in the account. So if you sell on a day, you won't know what you sold for until the end of that day at closeout. Now ETF, it's invested in pretty much the same type of stuff, but it acts and performs much more like an individual stock because you can trade it midday. You don't have to wait till the end of the day to figure out, okay, this is what it sold for. So that's kind of the difference there, just a little bit, give you an idea in general. And then up here, you've got your individual stocks. So individual stocks, that's considered higher risk, but you also have a higher reward if you pick the stock correctly. Now, I've tried my luck in picking stocks, and that's not my game. I need to stay away from that because, yeah, it just was not a good move for me. I was much better off being in this more passive. And a lot of people, if they're not really into that space, this is more often the better route. You're doing more of a passive that has decent returns, kind of set it and forget it. Now, give you an idea on going back to the whole fire stuff. And the only reason I'm bringing this up is because this along with investing in real estate, got my wife and I to the point where last year, back in October 2023, we were able to leave my corporate gig, and she didn't keep a job. We have 3 kids, and we were able to start our own business. And again, this put us in the financial situation to where we were secure enough to do that. Now we're here more than a year later. We're completely fine. It's because we implemented strategies like this, as well as purchasing real estate 5 years previously. So just keep that in mind. That's the whole reason I'm bringing this up. So when it comes to one thing I wanted to get to was, so that's that mutual fund I was referring to that was tracking the S&P 500. So that's VTSAX. The reason why they picked that, well, one because it was tracking the U.S. economy and because of the return. And I mean, when you're referring, like Warren Buffett even suggests this. And if it's good enough for Warren Buffett, honestly, it's good enough for me. But Warren Buffett says, hey, just pick a broad-based mutual fund like this. If you just want to passively invest, you'll get fair returns. Again, it's nothing crazy. You make a lot more on real estate. I consistently make double-digit returns. But for just average investing, 8% in the long run, it's really not that bad. So VTSAX, again, that's tracking the S&P 500, but also the expense ratio. So we're going to say expense ratio. So the expense ratio is 0.03%. And why is that important? Because your average bond, your mutual fund, your stock, it's going to be 0.5% plus. Now these brokerages, typically stocks are closer to the 1% range, and they're a little higher up there. So when you are trading in these brokerage accounts, yeah, you may click and trade very easily, but you got to look at all the expenses. They are making their money. There's a reason that these corporations are so large. They're definitely making their money, and that's why they don't want to self-direct. They're making all their commissions off of you buying and selling stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. So very important. You need to not only, when you're researching what fund you're going to go with, just keep in mind you want to see one that's had decent performance. Obviously, history doesn't prove that that's what it's going to do in the future. But I mean, a 50-year range for the S&P, that's decent. And again, you're betting on the U.S. economy. If the U.S. economy fails, you're probably not going to be worrying about your retirement at all, I would assume. So that was my thinking. Again, do your research. But as far as VTSAX, again, that expense ratio, when you're looking at stocks, bonds, mutual funds, anything, you need to be looking at that expense ratio as well as the additional research, because it's just like when you're taking inventory of your expenses. You may think it's a small item, but add that item up over the whole year, like the Starbucks. If you're getting a $5 cup of Starbucks coffee or vanilla latte, it's probably more than that now. But if you're getting that every single day, you add that up throughout the year, it's brutal. Like, it's painful. That's what we noticed when we were taking inventory. I mean, we thought, oh, this little bit here, this little bit here, it doesn't count. But it's those little items that they get you. They come up and bite you. So a trick that we did when we were doing this is any new expense we were going to get is we wanted to make sure that we looked at it. Okay, this is what it is monthly. But then we look at it from an annual perspective, like, okay, can we digest that? Like, is that really a number we want to be spending each year on this particular item? Is it worth it? So that's a good way to look at it. It's a larger number. That way it's more of a sticker shock and gets you to think about it a little more. It helped us. So just an idea there. And what other points did I want to hit here? Oh yeah. So that gives you an idea that's really where we started our investing journey. And again, when we were partially the way through this, that's when we started picking up more on real estate and going pretty heavy down that path. And it was the combination of these two items that got us in a good position to where we could leave the corporate gig and still have 3 kids and be completely fine. So not a bad path. Again, that's our path doesn't mean that it's going to be the perfect path for you. I'm just telling you what we did so you have a point of reference. Now, from there, again, we kind of went over the starting investment journey. That was the start, was the whole FIRE movement thing, but then supercharging your growth and returns. How are you going to supercharge it? Well, one, you either find a job where you're going to be paid more. And with that, again, once you've got your expenses locked in, do the most important thing, do not allow lifestyle creep. So you get that next raise, that's all money that you're going to put towards savings. You don't increase your lifestyle whatsoever. This is a super hack, and yes, it's a temporary pain. I mean, if you can't keep doing the same thing expecting a different result. So keep that in mind. If you want to stay in the same place, that's fine. Keep doing the same thing. But if you want to do something different or improve, you're going to have to make some sacrifice. So you make that additional money, again, all goes to savings. Then when you really supercharge it, and what we found is you find the side hustle, you find that side gig. And that is when all that income, any income we got from the real estate during this time frame when I was still employed with the W-2, it was being dumped into retirement. It was being dumped into other assets. I wasn't taking that money and spending it on anything. It was, I collect it, I put it in another asset. I collect it, I put it in another asset. Obviously, I needed to make sure I had enough operating expenses to keep those rentals up, because it does cost a lot. There's a lot of stuff that goes along with rentals where you need a pretty decent bank of money to make sure when things go south, like an HVAC system goes out, you need to be able to cover that. But again, supercharge your growth, really major hack is one, promote within. So either promote your job, but also the major contributor to that supercharged our success was the side hustle. Again, yours doesn't have to be in real estate. Maybe you've got an e-commerce store or something along those lines. That's totally fine. Now, one thing I do want to point out about this is truly a hack that you want to make sure that, again, you get to learn business. Like, one important thing I realized is this gave me the breathing room to learn business, kind of learn how to operate a business without the downfall, without as much of the risks. So I was learning how to operate a business while I was still in my W-2 income. So I had that money coming in, didn't really have to worry. That way you don't make rash decisions. So it's awesome. Having your W-2 is a superpower. You don't just go up and quit one day. It's not necessary, in my opinion, it's not necessarily the way to go, because you're going to put yourself in a bad situation and make rash decisions. So side hustle, again, earn while you learn. Earn while you learn. So keeping that W-2, and say this, the side hustle, you really start enjoying it and you really want to break away from that W-2. How did we do it? Well, we were taking into account, okay, what was our income when we left? What did our income number need to be at? Now, what we settled on was about 3/4, 75% of what our W-2 income was. We were like, okay, if we reach that amount, we've already kind of started the main business that we're going into when we leave the corporate career. Then we're probably going to be okay. I think we'll be fine. So we were comfortable with that number. So 75%, again, at least half to 3/4 W-2 income. Then you can start at least discussing breaking away. Now, the most ideal is realistically, you want to be making the same as that W-2 income or more. That's when you really know you've got a decent security, is when your side hustle starts making more than your W-2 income. Man, that's a good feeling. We were really close to that, but again, that's a good feeling to have. And then you've got that breathing room where you can either keep supercharging and putting all this money that you're making over here, throwing that into investment. Maybe you like your W-2. Again, this is going to be a killer way to supercharge your growth and your returns long term. So again, some awesome stuff there. And yeah, that was really our journey for the, like, super condensed. That was our journey. The only other thing I would bring up is when you're taking inventory of the expenses, if you're really in a tough spot where you're having a hard time affording where you're living, one thing we deployed was a thing called geo arbitrage. So we were looking for a place where, hey, it was a much less cost of living to where we could put ourselves in a much better financial place to get where we wanted to go. That's actually when we got into real estate, is when we moved to Kansas City from Texas. When I was working with the corporate gig, we picked Kansas City because it was a lower cost of living. We had other jobs on the table that were in more higher cost of living areas, but we chose Kansas City because it's like, hey, this fits our long-term goals. We want to go and invest in real estate. This is a really good market to invest in real estate. And our cost of living is going to be substantially reduced from where we're at now. So we were strategic in making that move. Again, it's another option. And it's something, if you are in like the financial growth mode and you're willing to make some sacrifices and you want to get out of that pit, that's a good strategy to deploy also. So with that, yeah, that's the vast majority of it. I hope this video was helpful for you. Again, this is a little bit into our journey and how we got where we're at. And yeah, we're still rocking and rolling. We're absolutely loving it. But I hope you guys definitely, if you're not there, I hope you are getting there. I hope this is useful to actually have stuff for you to implement and get to that point. But as far as the next videos, we are going to go back, deep dive into the self-directing retirement space, where we're going to break down an actual deal that I've done within that account, just to give you an idea of the whole inner workings of that. And then also, I want something for the high income earners that think that they can't invest in a Roth IRA. You 100% can. I'm going to break down how if you are outside of the limits for the Roth to contribute, I'm going to show you how you can do it with the backdoor Roth. And then I'm going to show you how to supercharge that with the mega backdoor Roth, where you can dump even more into it, which is a strategy that I deployed as well. So it's good stuff. I'll see you on the next videos. Catch you later.